Hello everyone, it's me again, Mr. Dark Web. Today I present you a story I found on a closed Senate forum dedicated to social engineering and psychological influence. This is the confession of a man known under the pseudonym Sable Mind, a specialist in manipulative techniques who for 5.5 years turned his life into a laboratory for the study of human consciousness. Today I will deviate from my usual format. Usually I tell you about cybercrime, hacker attacks, darknet trading, things that can be measured in stolen bitcoins or hacked databases. But this story is about something else. There are no drugs, guns, or thefts here. But what Sablemind did is perhaps scarier than any crime. He methodically destroyed the psyche of people who trusted him. Colleagues, lovers, even his own family, all became subjects in his experiment in controlling human behavior. The Sablemind story shows us the dark side of social engineering. Not the kind used by hackers to break into corporate systems, but the kind that targets the most vulnerable in human beings. Their trust, self-esteem, and ability to distinguish between truth and lies. It reveals the mechanisms of psychological control that can turn an ordinary IT manager into a puppeteer pulling the invisible strings of human emotions. But the most frightening thing about this story is not the methods he used, but how he gradually became a hostage to the system he created. The man who learnt to control others eventually lost control of himself. Make yourself comfortable, turn off your phone notifications, and get ready to dive into the mind of a man who turned psychological manipulation into an art, and then discovered that he could no longer distinguish between sincerity and calculation, even in himself. I don't know why I'm writing this, maybe to systematize my experience, maybe to hear that someone else has also come this far, or maybe just to understand where exactly I stopped being myself and became a system. My nickname is Sable Mind. I'm 34 years old, I'm based in Denver, Colorado, I work in IT, not a programmer, a middle-level project manager. I coordinate a team, communicate with clients, keep track of deadlines. Normal office life where success depends not on code, but on how you work with people. 5.5 years ago, I was a different person. Quiet, efficient, practically invisible. I was used in the collective. Girls looked through me, bosses used me as a convenient function. I wasn't resentful of the world, I just felt like a background character in other people's lives. Everything changed by accident. I was looking for ways to solve conflicts in the team on the internet. At that time, we had 2 developers having a cold war over the project architecture. I came across a forum about persuasion techniques. Common psychology, it would seem. But in the comments, someone mentioned the term gaslighting. Interesting. I started digging deeper. Reddit, Discord groups. Then I got to specialized resources via dark web forums. Social engineering, psychological influence, manipulative techniques. I read it like technical literature, without emotions, just studying the mechanisms. The first experiment was almost accidental. Emily worked in our team, a talented layout designer, but very insecure. She was always asking questions, doubting her decisions. I decided to try the flattery technique on her. Emily, you have a special approach to detail. Others do functionally, but you create a system. It's a rare talent. It sounded natural because there was some truth to it, but the effect was surprising. She straightened up, became more confident. She started to take more responsibility, stopped asking me every little thing, and most importantly, she began to treat me as a person who understood her. After a week, tried the combination. First praised her work, and when she was a little late with the task, used passive aggression. I thought you were the type to keep your word. Apparently I overestimated. She turned pale, started making excuses, apologizing, worked through the night to make it up to me. And I realized how it works. You can control people's emotional reactions if you know the right buttons. From that moment on, I began to study my colleagues like a programmer studies code. Everyone had weaknesses, the need for recognition, the fear of being wrong, the desire to be special. Ethan from the testing department reacted painfully to doubts about his competence. Marina from design melted from compliments about her creative vision. Matt the developer hated being interrupted. I mapped out their psychological traits and began to act. Not aggressively, carefully like a surgeon. Should Dmitri have checked the code more thoroughly? I doubted his conclusions, but delicately. Wanted Marina to work overtime? Praised her previous solutions and asked for a creative take on the new task. The results exceeded expectations. After 3 months, I became the informal center of the team. People came to me for advice, and my opinion was taken into account in planning. The management noticed, projects started to be delivered on time, and conflicts disappeared. But the most important discovery happened in my personal life. I met a girl through mutual acquaintances. Rachel, 26, worked in marketing. Usually it was difficult for me to maintain a conversation with attractive women. I would get lost, say platitudes. But now I had the tools. I studied her social media profile and realized that she doubted her professional value. Lots of posts about how difficult it was to progress in her career. The first night I told her, you have something about you that most marketers lack. You think about people, not just metrics. That's rare. Her eyes lit up. We talked until morning. She told me about her work, her plans, her dreams. I listened attentively and mirrored what she wanted to hear about herself. The relationship grew quickly, but not because there was chemistry between us. It was because I gave her exactly the attention and understanding she needed. When she was hesitant, I built her confidence. When she was overconfident, I gently brought her down to earth, creating a sense of depth in our relationship. 6 months later, she confessed, "With you, for the first time, I feel really understood." It was then that I realized the magnitude of the possibilities. I didn't just learn how to influence people. I learned how to create a reality for them in which I became indispensable. This power was intoxicating. At the same time, my career took off. I was promoted to senior project manager. My salary increased by 40%. I started receiving bonuses for effective team management and building a positive working atmosphere. At the end of the first year of the experiment, I sat down and summarized the results. Professional growth, stable relationships, respect from colleagues, financial stability, all the things I had lacked before. And all thanks to the understanding of a simple principle. People want certain emotions, and if you know how to give them, they are ready to give you anything in return. At the time, it seemed to me that I had simply gained a better understanding of psychology, that I had learnt to be more sensitive and attentive to others. The first year was a time of discovery and excitement about new possibilities. I felt like a person who had suddenly acquired a superpower. But superpowers, as it turned out, have a price. And I didn't yet know what price I would have to pay for the ability to be what others wanted me to be. The second year was a turning point. I stopped experimenting and started building a system. Individual techniques turned into a comprehensive methodology of influence. Gaslighting proved to be particularly effective in the working environment. When developer Ben complained that I had not warned him about a change in requirements, I calmly replied, "I thought we discussed it at Tuesday's planning meeting. You were even nodding, distracted perhaps." I deleted my messages in chat rooms, referring to alleged verbal agreements. After a month, Ben started recording our conversations and constantly asked me to repeat them. He no longer argued with my decisions. At the same time, I developed the technique of double messages. It worked perfectly with Emily, for example. This morning I was like, "Your layout yesterday was excellent." An hour later, "I thought after yesterday's success you'd raise the bar, but I guess that was an isolated incident." She was lost, not knowing what was wrong. The uncertainty kept her in suspense, making her seek my approval. I was doing psychological profiles of my colleagues. Marketing manager Sophie reacted painfully to hints about her age. HR manager Pavel prided himself on his erudition, but was unsure about technical issues. I used the technique of feigned incomprehension. "Paul, you're an intellectual. Can you explain the term in human terms?" He spent half an hour explaining things he didn't really understand, feeling stupid. By the end of the year, I controlled the emotional atmosphere in the team. I could create tension with a look or diffuse the situation with a comment. I was promoted to senior manager. My salary increased by 30%. My personal life became more complicated. Relationships with Rachel became predictable. I learned all her weaknesses. I started having parallel relationships. Ashley is a designer from a partner company who has recently broken up with her boyfriend. I used pity. I told her about her difficult childhood and created an image of a vulnerable man. She bought it completely. Megan is an ambitious colleague from another department. With her, I became a mentor, someone who sees her potential. 3 girls, 3 masks, 3 separate worlds. Each of them thought our relationship was special. With Rachel, I was an understanding partner. With Ashley, a romantic. With Megan, a mentor. The techniques became more sophisticated. I mastered the use of the particle don't. The subconscious mind ignores negation. The phrases "don't worry" or "don't worry" only increased anxiety. It worked perfectly with anxious Emily. Began using devaluation. Subtle jabs under the guise of criticism. For example, "Not bad for the local level. It is far from international standards, but progress is being made." Each comment shattered confidence, made me seek my approval. I created a system of controlling people through their psychological weaknesses. I could make them feel guilty for something they didn't do. I could make them dependent on my opinion. I could make them feel any emotion at the right moment. The job brought not only money, but also power. I received unofficial commissions. Colleagues asked me to put in a good word or help resolve a conflict. I sold information about the mood in the team to the HR departments from other tech companies. In 2 years, he turned from an invisible manager into a key figure in the office. People came for advice, confided secrets, sought support, and I used every bit of trust to build influence. The sweetest part wasn't the money, it was the feeling of being in complete control of someone else's emotions. Could make a strong man feel like an insecure child, turn an independent woman into someone who couldn't make a decision without my approval. It was power in its purest form, over what people thought about themselves, about the world, about me. And I was just beginning to explore its possibilities. The 3rd and 4th years were the peak of my abilities. I was no longer applying techniques, I was living them. Every word, every gesture, every pause was designed to get the right reaction. Began experimenting with the most subtle methods of influence. Schizophrenogenic communication, haphazard feedback that creates chaos in the victim's perception. I conducted a real experiment with one of my new employees, Max. Monday, ignored him completely, pretended not to hear his questions. Tuesday, paid extra attention, praised every little thing. Wednesday, indifference again. Thursday, criticized for the same actions I praised on Tuesday. A month later, Max started to get nervous when I appeared. He didn't know what to expect from me, constantly trying to guess my mood. His productivity dropped, and he started making mistakes that he had never made before. His colleagues began to treat him as a problem employee. I have studied more exotic techniques, evoking psychosomatic reactions, creating an association between a state of helplessness and an external trigger. When having difficult conversations with employees, criticizing, dealing with mistakes, creating stressful situations, I always use the same conditions. For example, I always drank cinnamon coffee during these conversations or wore a certain perfume. I repeated this every time a person was in a critical emotional state. Ashley started to feel uncomfortable with the smell of cinnamon. She was getting headaches and inner tension. Megan became anxious when she smelled my perfume. She automatically expected an unpleasant conversation. They didn't understand the connection, writing it off as stress or fatigue. The technique of self-concept erasure has proven to be particularly destructive, systematically undermining self-esteem by questioning a person's basic identity. With a male colleague, he used phrases like, "What kind of expert are you if you can't figure out a simple task?" Or, "It's strange that a man of your experience would make such mistakes." Every remark hit his professional self-esteem. They started doubting their skills, looking for confirmation of competence in small things, became dependent on my assessments. The family also became a testing ground for experiments. With my mother, I used a combination of techniques. The problem is in you and arousing pity. When she tried to give advice or criticize my way of life, I turned the situation around with similar phrases. "I realize I'm disappointing you. You're probably right. I'm a loser. I've tried all my life, but I'm still not good enough for your standards." She immediately switched to defense mode, started to comfort me, feeling guilty for my unfair claims. Half an hour later, she was already apologizing and offering to help. The technique of goal destruction worked perfectly for ambitious people. When a colleague told me about his plans or dreams, I carefully undermined his motivation with phrases like these. "That's an interesting idea. Are you sure the market is ready for it?" Or, "It sounds ambitious. Too bad it takes a lot of resources to realize, which we don't have. Or, good aim, but I'd solve the current problems first if I were you. The person gradually lost enthusiasm and began to doubt the realism of the plans. His energy was redirected to seeking approval and solving imaginary obstacles that I had created. By the 4th year, my reputation in the company was impeccable. I had become the unspoken psychologist of the team. People came to me with personal problems, asking for advice, confiding secrets. The management saw me as someone who knows how to work with people. I was promoted to business manager. My team grew to 15 people. My salary doubled. But most importantly, I had access to a wider range of test subjects. Personal life became even more complicated. In addition to my 3 main girlfriends, I had several backup relationships. Women I kept on an emotional hook for special occasions. Each thought we were in a special relationship. The system had become so fine-tuned that I could predict people's reactions with pinpoint accuracy. I knew which words would make a person feel guilty, which tone would cause anxiety, which gesture would create a sense of intimacy. I started to get serious money from the outside. Some managers paid me for so-called personal management counseling. In essence, for teaching manipulative techniques. HR agencies ordered psychological portraits of valuable employees of other companies. The biggest earner was the divorce of one married couple. The wife suspected her husband of cheating and hired me through acquaintances to psychologically probe him. During 3 months of dialogue with him in the gym, I introduced to him so many doubts about the relationship that he himself filed for divorce. I received $16,000 for my counseling services. It was the peak of my powers. I felt like a puppeteer controlling marionettes. I could make people fall in love, make friends quarrel, destroy someone's self-esteem, or on the contrary, inspire self-confidence. But the worst thing was that I could no longer distinguish between where the techniques ended and where I began. Every conversation automatically became a session of analysis and influence. Even with people close to me, I couldn't just talk. I could only influence, control, manage. When a waiter in a cafe was rude, I automatically started a program to suppress him emotionally. When a salesman tried to push a product, I would turn the situation around so that he would apologize and offer discounts. I stopped feeling spontaneous emotions. Every feeling went through a filter. How can I use it? What kind of reaction will it elicit? Is it profitable for me to show it? The techniques became part of my personality. I no longer switched them on and off. They worked all the time. And it was then that I began to suspect that I was no longer in control of the process, but that the process was controlling me. Year 5 began with a feeling of complete control. I thought I had reached perfection. But it was then that the system suffered its first serious setbacks. The first sign is that Alyona suddenly changed. She stopped responding to the usual techniques. When I applied the standard scheme, praise followed by devaluation, she just shrugged her shoulders. You always do that. First you praise, then you belittle. I wonder why. She scanned the correspondence, showed it to HR. No specific violations were found, but the seeds of suspicion were planted. Colleagues started analyzing me. The hunter became the prey. The next blow came from his personal life. Ashley disappeared for a week, then sent a voicemail. It's like you're putting me together out of cubes. I speak, you immediately respond with what I need to hear, and I realize it's not you. It's some kind of script. I'm scared. I listened to it 6 times. For the first time, it wasn't control, but confusion. Not because of the exposure, but because she was right. I was working from scripts. No more feeling, just playing the right lines. I spent 3 days analyzing the situation, developing a new strategy. I decided to play on honesty, to admit some of the truth, but present it as caring for her. I wrote a long message about how I studied relationship psychology to understand her better, how I wanted to be an ideal partner, but even carefully crafted words couldn't convince her. Ashley didn't respond again. At work, a group of employees started avoiding communication. Max, who was experimented on with schizophrenic communication, filed a report. The reason was a psychologically uncomfortable atmosphere. HR called for a conversation. Employees complain about the strange atmosphere. They say they don't feel comfortable with you. Used the whole armory, shifted responsibility. Some employees are going through a difficult period. Personal problems are affecting perceptions. Used gaslighting. They may be misinterpreting my demand for quality work. Added false concern. I am willing to help them adapt if there are specific problems. HR nodded, took notes, but I saw suspicion in their eyes. I was transferred to another project, formally a promotion, actually isolation. Less communication, more reporting. Rachel started asking uncomfortable questions. Why don't you ever say how you feel? You only ask how I feel. Or, do you remember the last time you were just yourself? I didn't know how to answer. I didn't remember. I had become a system of reactions, a set of patterns. Somewhere I lost the real me. Megan was getting distant too. I overheard her talking. He's not real, like a robot programmed to be nice. The worst part was that I began to analyze myself using the same methods. I couldn't tell the difference between genuine emotions and calculated reactions. Do I want to eat or use lunch to talk? Do I like a film or analyze what emotions it should evoke? Sleep problems, fell asleep at 3-4 a.m. scrolling through conversations, analyzing failures. Woke up with a feeling of night work. I started automatically applying the techniques everywhere. If a waiter brought the wrong dish, I started a suppression program. A neighbor made a noise. I planned a psychological impact. Couldn't even talk to my mother easily. Every conversation was a session of manipulation. She complained about her health. I used it to induce guilt. She criticized her lifestyle. I turned the situation around. But sometimes I've seen it from the outside. An old woman wants to talk to her son, and what she gets is a psychological manipulator. By the end of the year, I realized that I no longer control the system. The system controls me. The techniques have become reflexes. I can't switch them off because I don't remember what I was like before them. For the first time in years, I felt fear. Not fear of exposure, but fear that the real me no longer existed. The most paradoxical thing is that even with the feelings of fear and doubt, I didn't feel like I wanted to change. The last year and a half was spent in a strange state of conscious dissociation. I realized that the system had absorbed me, but I had no desire to get out. Rather, I continued to improve it. After failures, I developed more subtle methods. I stopped being obvious and learned to create the illusion of spontaneity. If I used to be a surgeon, now I am a pharmacist. The effect is subtle but constant. In his new position, he worked with external clients. Here, the techniques flourished. Negotiations, presentations, everything where psychological influence is considered the norm. Learned how to read people in minutes. Found weaknesses through disguised psychological tests. Offered solutions that clients thought were their ideas. Revenues multiplied. Businessmen paid simply to be present at negotiations. I could tip the scales with the right line. Personal life has stabilized. After losing 3 girls, I changed my strategy. No long-term relationships, only short-term relationships with a clear understanding of the limits. I've become more honest with myself. I recognize that I use people for release and interest. I stopped deluding myself about finding love. Sometimes I feel remorse. Usually at night I see the faces of those I've broken. Max, who quit his job. Ashley, who was afraid to trust herself. But the moments pass. In the morning I realize the way the world works is that someone is influenced. Someone is influenced. I chose the first category. Moreover, I'm not sure I distinguish between sincerity and calculation in myself. When I feel guilty, is it a real emotion or an automatic reaction? Trying to switch off to be myself, but who is myself? A man from 6 years ago seems weak and naive. I don't want to go back. The techniques have become so deeply part of me that I can't imagine life without them. It's like refusing to talk. It's possible, but it means becoming disabled. Now I live in a rented flat. I work remotely, counseling on negotiations and conflict management. The clients are happy. No one asks about methods. I don't have any close friends. I have useful acquaintances, temporary connections. It's not depression, it's a conscious choice. Intimacy requires vulnerability, and I don't know how to be vulnerable. I meet people who are like my old self, insecure, looking for acceptance, and I choose to use them rather than help them. Not out of spite, it's just natural. That's why I'm writing this post, not for repentance. I'm not repenting. Not for bragging. I don't need approval. It's a question for those who understand. I don't know where the line is between tool and essence. It helps me in my work, in my relationships, in my everyday life. But sometimes I feel that I disappear inside the process. Is it right to continue, or should I try to stop? Is there a way out if it takes too long to enter? And the big question is, do any of you want to go out, or do we realize it's a one-way road? Sablemind's story ended as vaguely as it began, with an unanswered question. Within a few days, his post attracted dozens of comments from Senate users. Some shared similar experiences, others argued about moral boundaries, and still others simply observed. But Sablemind himself was never seen on the forum again. The last time he came in 3 days after posting, replied to comments, and disappeared. Maybe he found his answer. Or maybe he realized that the question was wrong. What struck me about this story was not the techniques the hero used. Most of them are well known in psychology. I was struck by the evolution of a man who started with the desire to become better at communication and ended up losing the ability to be sincere at all. And the amazing thing is that he doesn't want to go back to his old self, doesn't want to change, just methodically searching for the answer. Sablemind has posed questions to which there are no easy answers. Where is the line between understanding psychology and manipulation? Is it right to exploit the weaknesses of others for your own benefit if it brings success? And most importantly, is it possible to stop once the system has become part of you? Each of us influences others on a daily basis, with words, actions, even silence. But when does this influence become a conscious tool of control? And should we condemn a person for simply being more effective in using the same mechanisms that everyone else uses? Think about it the next time someone is too precise in saying exactly what you want to hear. As always, yours, Mr. Dark Web. Have a good evening, and see you again in the dark corners of the web we explore together.